Tonight, Zelenskyy says his row with Trump in the Oval Office was regrettable and says he's ready to sign a minerals deal with the US. The Ukrainian president's also been outlining how the war might stop with a first-stage plan where prisoners would be released and missiles and long-range drones banned. This after Donald Trump paused military aid for Ukraine in a move which shocked European capitals overnight. I'll be joined live in a moment by Steve Bannon to ask the former Trump advisor whether his old boss will now be minded to a deal with Zelenskyy. Also tonight, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Trump's tariffs on his country are a dumb thing to do, as he puts it. We'll look at what their impact will be. And on this day, 16 years ago, a British Prime Minister in the US to talk up the special relationship and warning against tariffs. We've been looking in the archives to see just how much has changed. We're building a special relationship with us tonight, possibly. Dhesi and Andrea Jenkyns will be with me for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Ali Fortescue live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, for those wondering what's been running through Donald Trump's mind since that fireside row with President Zelenskyy, overnight, his clearest message yet. US aid to Ukraine has been paused. A huge decision with consequences, whether or not it's a high-stakes negotiating tactic. But the thing to remember, for those of us trying to second-guess what the US president's going to do next, is that Donald Trump has form. He's blocked aid to Ukraine before, and I want to take you back to a very different meeting between the same two men 3 years before the war in Ukraine started, when President Trump was accused of attempting to coerce President Zelenskyy into investigating his rival Joe Biden, revelations that, of course, later led to the president's first impeachment.
President Zelenskyy, have you felt any pressure from President Trump to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden?
I think you read everything. So I think you read text. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be involved to democratic, open elections of USA. No, you heard that we had, I think, good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. Yes.
In other words, no pressure.
Well, that seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it? Seeing President Zelenskyy in his suit effectively backing up President Trump, a very different meeting to the one that unfolded last week, and a very different tone to his predecessor. This was Joe Biden, who tried to funnel aid towards Ukraine just before he left office.
Ukraine is still free, independent country with the potential for a bright future. And we laid the foundation for the next administration so they can protect the bright future of the Ukrainian people.
Well, it's a dividing line that, of course, Donald Trump played into in the election campaign. And then there is J.D. Vance, a maverick vice president accused of disrespecting the French and British military overnight after he appeared to describe a proposed Anglo-French peace deployment to Ukraine as 20,000 troops from some random country that has not fought a war in 30 or 40 years. Well, I should say that today the vice president came out swinging, denying he's disrespected British troops. But as the Western alliance cracks, you've got to ask what President Putin is thinking now. The government here has talked a lot about calm, but they know just how quickly things can move. Tonight, President Zelenskyy appears to have backed down, suggesting he'd back a ceasefire, and he's ready any time to sign a deal on minerals and security. He's released a video tonight outlining his position. Let's take a listen.
This isn't 2022. Our resilience is stronger now. We have the means to defend ourselves. But what truly matters is maintaining a stable and genuine partnership with the United States, one that leads to a real end to this war. Ukraine will always be grateful to America for all the support it has provided and continues to provide. Support that helps us uphold what remains of Europe's fragile security architecture. This isn't just about our country. It concerns all of Europe. We seek constructive cooperation, a relationship built on trust. What's happened at the White House instead of our planned negotiations is regrettable. But we must find the strength to move forward, to respect one another, as we have always respected America, Europe and all our partners, and to work together towards peace.
Well, you heard there, Zelensky appears to be ready to do what it takes to try to make amends. The question now, how is this olive branch going to be received in Washington? Well, I'm pleased to say Liz Bates, our political correspondent, is with me to give us a bit of the reaction there's been here in the UK. What's the Prime Minister been saying?
Well, I mean, first of all, Ali, it's incredible how much Zelensky has changed, isn't it, in just a few years? Those pictures just really show the toll that it's taken on him. That's what I just reflected on in your opening remarks. In terms of Downing Street today and the Prime Minister's response, it's exactly as you would expect it to be, really. Quite calm, measured. Clearly, that's the approach that they want to take to this. They really want to dial down tensions rather than ramp them up. There's been a phone call, as you might expect, with Zelensky. You can see the picture there. Nothing that you wouldn't expect from that phone call. Updated on discussions with President Trump. They talked again about trying to secure a lasting peace. They promised that they would continue to stay in touch. This is a strategy from the Prime Minister that we've seen now unfold over the past few weeks. Flatter America in public, negotiate hard in private. He wants to be the bridge between Washington and Europe and Zelensky. It's been very well received here. He's received a lot of praise for it. I think the question today is it actually going to be effective? Because what we've seen is the most substantive issue of military aid for Ukraine paused. It does seem like Number 10 were, to some extent, blindsided. If they weren't blindsided by this, they certainly couldn't do anything about it. I think you will see this strategy continue from Number 10, no question, but without the US cooperation on this and that security guarantee in the future, I think there are questions for Number 10 really over whether it is going to be effective going forward.
Yeah, and quickly, from what I can see, there's been a bit of a not total alignment on the Tory front bench. Is that right?
Yeah, difficult for the Tories. I mean, Kemi Badenoch has had to step in today with some of her Conservative MPs. First of all, Graham Stewart, who came out on Twitter with something incredibly surprising. This is what he said: "We have to consider the possibility that President Trump is a Russian asset. If so, Trump's acquisition is the crowning achievement of Putin's FSB career, and Europe is on its own." Alicia Cairns, also Shadow Home Affairs, said something, I think, along those lines, suggesting that the second state visit should be cancelled until America could prove themselves as an ally. And James Cartledge as well, who is a shadow defence minister, calling out JD Vance today on X, calling him disrespectful because of those comments that he made. So Kemi Badenoch trying to put a lid on this today.
Yeah, has she managed it? Unclear. Right, thank you so much, Liz. Well, I'm pleased to say joining me now is Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist to President Trump, of course, and now podcast host of Bannon's War Room. I know you've recently had JD Vance on your podcast. I'm pleased we've got you on because we're hoping you can help us get into the mind of Donald Trump. I want to ask you first about your comments. You said you described Friday's meeting as the perfect outcome. What did you mean by that?
Because we got Zelensky out of there with a no deal and ridiculous minerals deal. Zelensky's a punk. I find offensive your chyron that Zelensky's ready to deal with the United States. I think people to the right of President Trump and people around President Trump, maybe not inside the White House, are strongly advocating absolutely no security guarantee, no minerals deal. Call the bluff of the EU, call the bluff of the United Kingdom, call the bluff of Macron. Let you guys step up, which you haven't to date, and actually do your fair share, if you want to, in Ukraine. We've had it. We're done with it. There's too much blood have been spilled, too much destruction. We called this from the very beginning. Exactly what's going to happen. It's time now to cut our losses.
Isn't the perfect outcome peace, though? Doesn't that involve getting all the sides around the table?
Why does Zelensky have a say-so in that? If we cut off arms to him, we cut off. If we cut off arms.
Do you not think Zelensky should have a say? Sorry, can I just confirm? Do you not think Zelensky should have a say-so in the future of his own country?
No, I do not believe Zelensky, because first off, he's 16%. He's not even democratically elected. Right now, if EU
Well,
wants
he
a
did
wants
win an
a wants a part of the table, listen. If Zelensky wants a part of the table, have the United Kingdom step up, have France step up. Van der Leyen is saying you're going to do $800 billion defense raise. Have the people in the United Kingdom should ask, can you send 30,000 troops? This is not about the quality of British troops. Your valor and
Haven't we
courage is
given
unquestioned.
signals that we would put troops on the ground?
Your valor and courage is unquestioned. You're in financial distress right now. You're very close to having a sovereign debt crisis. You don't have the money. You're totally underwater. Your economy's not performing. And you live in this fantasy, both the Tories and the Labour Party, just like Macron, that you have unlimited resources to send to Ukraine. The Russian army in 3 years at 800,000 casualties has not taken Kharkiv, has not even gotten close to Kiev. They can't cross Poland. They can't go into Germany. You're living in a fantasy land. And somebody's got to talk some hard realities to the people of Europe of what you're actually about to take on. Zelensky is untrustworthy. He's a crook and a punk. And he showed what a punk he was in the Oval Office the other day. He should never be allowed back in. I don't think he should ever be allowed back in to the United States.
I think a lot of people would disagree with you on the point that President Zelensky is a crook and a punk. There were democratic elections.
I don't care if people agree with me. I don't care if people agree with me or not. I don't care if people.
The point of principle here is that Russia invaded a sovereign country.
We've sent $250 billion to Ukraine. $250 billion. President Trump says $350. $250. He says he can only account for $88 billion. We want a full investigation of where every penny went that the United States sent. And once that's done, you'll see why they're rated the third most corrupt country in the world. Not by war rooms,
Sorry. Are
not
you
by
saying that if
Republicans.
Zelensky comes back, Donald Trump shouldn't do a deal with him? If President
Absolutely
Zelensky
not.
comes back and presents...
No, irrelevant.
So
he had his shot. He showed what a punk he is. He had his shot. And this is not about saying thank you.
Do you think President Trump agrees with you on that? Do you think he is open?
I hope President Trump agrees with me on that. It's the right thing to do. Right now, Zelensky, if he crawled on his belly, it doesn't make any difference. He came over the other day when they told him time and time and time again, do not bring up a security guarantee. A security guarantee means a more American support of the military option and American troops, and that will never happen. The American people never stand for it. And what did he do? He went and met with globalist Democrats and Republican senators at the Hay Adams Hotel beforehand. He came in, and from the entire 40 minutes, he was disrespectful. And this has nothing to do, the American people don't need thanks. We've been allies for the last 100 and some years. We've never asked the British people for thank you. We know you're an ally, okay? He didn't need to say thank you. What he needed to do was to sign the deal that, quite frankly, many people around President Trump thought was too nice to begin with. We don't need a rare earths deal. The United States doesn't need rare earths from Ukraine. That was a total gift to him and the Ukrainian people. He couldn't come across and sign the deal. 3 times he backed out of it. And he came there, and all he wanted to talk about is a security guarantee. But they told him, as a condition precedent to this deal, that will never be on the table. And he forced it, and they threw him out of the White House. This has never happened before in American history. A leader of a country got thrown out of the White House and told, get off the lot, because of his behavior. And I'm telling you, President Trump is a very gracious man, a very forgiving man, but there are people around President Trump, myself included, that are advocating take a very hard line and call the bluff of NATO, call the bluff of the EU, call the bluff of the United Kingdom and France. If you've got the money and you got the troops, let's see if you do it. I will guarantee you, every government that does that will be turfed out by their people because you're all broke.
We just have this from Reuters that the US and Ukraine are preparing to sign a minerals deal. So it sounds like it is on the table. An announcement this evening. I didn't say,
by the way, I said people around President Trump are advocating not to do it. Like I said, this would be the 4th time that Ukraine said that they're going to sign a minerals deal. Every time they get there, they want a security guarantee. They want more security guarantee. This just shows you that they broke Zelensky of what he was trying to do. But I still don't trust it because this is only a framework. This is not actually the deal itself. This is just a very general framework. The United States does not need rare earths from Kiev and from Ukraine. We don't need it. This is a gift to the Ukrainian people. It actually involves the United States, I think, way too much in the future reconstruction of the country, which I adamantly oppose. And I think people to the right of President Trump adamantly oppose. So this is not something I think should go down the path of, but it shows you how magnanimous President Trump is.
Do you trust President Putin then?
No, I don't trust Putin. He's KGB. Of course, he's not trustworthy.
But what
By the way,
message
did we
do you
trust
think this US government's sending? Hold on. Let me just ask a question.
In World War II, did FDR and Churchill trust Joseph Stalin? No, they didn't trust him. He's a Bolshevik.
Okay, so
you had to deal with him. You don't trust these people.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? What message do you think the US government is sending then when look like you're lifting sanctions potentially, halting cyber operations against Russia? We've seen Putin and Trump round the table at the same time as
it's
we're seeing
brilliant
this
because
stark criticism of President Zelensky
the rapprochement of the United States with Russia breaks the control of the Chinese Communist Party with Persia and with Russia right now on the Eurasian landmass. It's a brilliant stroke. And the European Union is going to come along with it. You watch, they'll come along with it. And look, if part of that is this minerals deal to get it going, President Trump's very magnanimous. I would never do it. And I think people to the right of President Trump would say we should never do it. And that's why Zelensky should understand when he's dealing with President Trump, he's dealing with somebody that's trying to go out of his way to be a peacemaker, that there are many voices to the right of him of saying, cut it off. Let Europe, if NATO's such big shots and the EU are such big shots, they don't pay for the defense today, let them step up and let them underwrite the security in Ukraine.
To stepping up in the UK.
Excuse me?
2.5%. We've just committed to stepping up to 2.5% in the UK. So is that not a move in the right direction?
2.5% is nothing. 2.5% is nothing. And look at your combat capabilities. You guys are going, look, you're doing more than anybody else, but you're so far away from doing it. If you actually want to do this, we're at 3.5% of GDP. If you wanted to make up for all the years you didn't invest in what's happened to the Royal Navy and what's happened to your Army, which were the two greatest in the world, you have so much investment you have today, and you can't afford it. You're not going to be able to have your public health system. You're not going to be able to have your retirement plans, your pensions. You understand these are all trade-offs and hard trade-offs. You're in financial distress right now. It's arguable that the IMF could be stepping in to Great Britain in the next couple of years. Your bond market already turfed out Liz Truss. You think you're out of that right now? You haven't looked at what's happening to the British economy. And you have to put that in context of stepping up for a massive defense increase.
OK, I know you don't have much time, so I want to get through as much as we can. I want to ask you about J.D. Vance's comments last night, talking about 20,000 troops from some random country. I think you've made clear your views on British defence capabilities, but, you know, what countries do you think you're talking about there?
Nobody's questioned the French in the British capabilities and the valor of their troops and the courage and the great. But if you look at NATO outside of the United Kingdom,
specifically on J.D. Vance, what countries do you think he was talking about there?
I think J.D. Vance has gone out of his way to be gracious. I think he's a very gracious man. I think he's done a great job as vice president. The reality is
about the UK and France.
The reality is that NATO, of which we're an allied partner. Remember, I was the lead dog in trying to get NATO up to 2% in the first term, which they refused to do, only the UK and Poland. If you look at an entire NATO, I'm not sure you can put up 2 combat divisions to actually take on the Russians. The whole of NATO has faked this for decades and decades and decades. Even your own self-imposed 2%, very few people make. And when the British do more, it's like it's tremendous. But quite frankly, the EU can't really afford this. If you want to have everything else, given how leveraged you are, given the sovereign debt crises, I don't know, that Italy and France and Germany and Spain and Portugal and Greece and maybe the United Kingdom may all face, you're not facing economic reality. And right now, what President Trump is trying to say, if we put the guns down and we can get to peace, then we can start hammering swords into plowshares. And part of that is a rapprochement with the Russians, which I think he's doing a magnificent job of. And once you do that, you break them off from the Chinese Communist Party, a Chinese Communist Party that much of the British establishment is in business with.
OK. I want to ask you, I mean, you've shown a clear interest in Europe as well, and we all know you were accused of making a Nazi salute at a Conservative gathering. Jordan Bardella, the man who at the top of the Le Pen's party, cancelled his scheduled speech as a result of that. He said it was a gesture referring to Nazi ideology. I know you've denied it, but what did you make of his comments?
Number one, as you know, I know you guys keep up with the news. Saturday night in Dallas, I talked to a huge group, Jewish group called Israel 365, to multiple standing ovations, because they know I'm probably the most pro-Israel person at any senior levels anywhere, except for President Trump. I said about Bardella, he's too big a pussy to run France. There's no chance that this guy would be able to take on and govern a
Can we just
great nation
apologise
like
for that language?
well, I said it, right? And I said it when it first happened. This guy's a wimp. He's a boy toy, and he'll never be the head of France. And I've said this from the beginning, from when he first went on. He's such a gutless wimp. To kowtow to the mainstream media with something that was such a blatant lie shows you he's not man enough to govern a great nation like France.
OK, well, you've also shown an interest in British politics and in the likes of Maurice Glassman, Blue Labour. Is that a sort of part of the Labour Party that you're going to be more involved with?
I don't know if involved with. I'm quite fascinated with Lord Glassman and Blue Labour. I met with him in Washington, D.C. at length. I've gone through all his writings. I think some of the things he stands for and Blue Labour stands for is actually extraordinary, very close to the kind of the populist nationalism that we propose in the United States. And quite frankly, we're winning elections on that. And you see right now, everybody from Sherrod Brown to Fetterman to Ro Khanna, that kind of populist part of the Democratic Party tends to agree with us on economic policy. So no, I think there's a lot there. And of course, I'm a Nigel Farage guy and believe in reform. But I think what Blue Labour has is some of it's very interesting, particularly the way it ties together with Catholic social thought. OK, thank you so much. I think that's all you've got time for. Steve Bannon, really appreciate you coming on the Politics Hub this evening. Well, let's go live to Washington and bring in our correspondent, David Blevins. I don't know if you're listening across that, but I'd be interested to hear your reaction if you were, David.
Well, yeah, it is interesting what Steve Bannon had to say. Important to remember that he's never been a yes man, of course, but he is a man who knows the mind of Donald Trump, having been his chief strategist before his fall from grace. I think the other thing worth pointing out as well is right now Steve Bannon is deeply suspicious of people within Trump's inner circle. He's been very critical of Elon Musk's influence, for example, and alone to some extent within the Republican movement in that sense. But how much more suspicious is he going to be of people outside of that circle? I didn't really expect to hear him describe Volodymyr Zelenskyy as a crook and a punk, or to suggest that President Trump should be calling Ukraine's bluff or the bluff of the EU and the UK. But there are two things I think it's important we fact check him on. He described Zelenskyy as being on 16% in the polls and not democratically elected. Of course, he's sitting somewhere between 57 and 63% in the polls and is most definitely democratically elected. He also talked about the United States having contributed $250 billion in military aid to Ukraine, where in reality it's more in the region of $175 billion. So Steve Bannon clearly was a man who once knew the mind of Donald Trump. I'm not sure he knows it right now, because Donald Trump, from what we're hearing in the last few moments, appears to be reasonably content on the basis of the comments we've heard from President Zelenskyy, both online and in the video he has now posted, in which he expressed regret, the very term the Washington National Security Advisor was suggesting he should use yesterday, in that he's expressing his willingness to sign this deal at a time of America's, this minerals deal at a time of America's choosing, and also recognising that it could be the first step towards some sort of security guarantees, and actually setting out the terms of a potential ceasefire in due course. We've never heard that from him before. We are now hearing the possibility, in fact, Reuters are reporting that the US and Ukraine could be planning to sign the minerals deal as early as this evening, because President Trump wants to be able to announce that when he addresses Congress. And there we have it, really. Donald Trump is always the showman. Right now, he has a tornado of news going on around him, whether it's tariffs or whether it's the business with Ukraine. But he's the man at the centre. And he wants to step onto the platform tonight at this joint session of Congress, effectively the equivalent of the State of the Union address, only in an election year, and tell people, I'm Donald Trump, the deal maker. And I think we're going to hear a lot of that this evening.
All right, David Blevins, thank you very much. David Blevins there for us in Washington. Well, Donald Trump is going to be addressing Congress at 2 a.m. in the morning, based on that report from Reuters that David mentioned there, that Trump could announce a Ukraine minerals deal during it. You'll be able to see later. We'll have live coverage here on Sky News at 2 a.m. Well, for much more on the ongoing global impact of Donald Trump and America's diplomatic wrangling, I think we can speak now to former Defence Secretary and former Business Secretary Grant Shapps. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, Mr. Shapps. I don't think we've spoken to you since. I mean, things have obviously moved incredibly quickly the last few days. I'd be interested first just to get your reaction to obviously that row between President Zelensky and Trump on Friday and what we've seen from Keir Starmer.
So obviously that was pretty regrettable, and to say the least. I mean, it was pretty disgraceful, to put it more directly. I don't think we expect to see democratic countries eaten up in that way by a country that is, prides itself on being the home of the free. And the problem is that, Western leaders like Sir Keir Starmer don't really have much of a choice here. And I want to say, actually, I think he's doing a decent job of this in difficult circumstances. But to sort of, play the Trump game. But I'm not in office, and I can say it honestly, which is that I'm sickened by seeing a US presidency picking the dictator and roughing up the Democrat. And that's not something that I think is very becoming for the US. I think it's actually a very sad moment. But our leaders can't be clear about that. They can't say it because of the way that Trump behaves. And we saw Putin being bullied in the Oval Office. I mean, it's just said absolutely outright. I mean, that is what happened. And the entire, the invader being must have loved it. And Putin must have been sitting in the Kremlin watching that and cheering. And that is quite surprising from the United States of America and quite depressing. But it massively goes to the thing that many of us have been saying all along. I made a speech about it at the beginning of last year. Europe needs to stand on its own 2 feet. And if there is blame to apportion here, it goes to those of us in Europe, first of all, for underspending for all of these years on our defence.
I'm going to come on to spending in a minute, but you talked there about President Zelensky being bullied. Do you think we should see some tougher language from Keir Starmer calling out Donald Trump?
So I completely understand the position that Keir Starmer is in, right? And he needs to act as a bridge. And so I think that he needs to remain true to himself. It was good to see Zelensky come to London the next day. If you think about those pictures, Starmer could have not greeted him in the street in Downing Street, could have. He didn't do any of those things. I thought that was very good and absolutely the right way to approach this. You've got to be honest in yourself. I think the problem for Zelensky at that famous news conference on Friday night in the Oval Office is that Zelensky doesn't come from a political background. He's come in, he's been a war leader. He wasn't a politician in advance of that, of course. And so, as a politician, you watch something like that Oval Office press conference back, and you see, it's going to wind up Trump, that's going to wind up Vance. I wouldn't have put it quite like that. And you could see how the thing spiraled, very much out of control. But Zelensky is authentic. The guy has been running a country at war for 3 years. Let's be completely blunt about it. It is depressing to see the United States of America, the home of the free, kicking the dictator out of the Kremlin and pushing up the entirely innocent party who's had their country invaded. And it's the wrong way round. And although it may actually end up, I hope, with some of the right results, and we've seen Zelensky move on this today, and I think that's all very welcome as well. It shouldn't be the case that democracies fail to stand up for each other, because when you do that, eventually there's no one to stand up for you, and that is the danger to all of this.
I want to ask you a bit about the clarity of messaging in your own party today, because the new Shadow Defence Secretary, or newish Shadow Defence Secretary, has called out J.D. Vance. These were J.D. Vance's comments about 20,000 troops from some random country. He said it was disrespectful to ignore such service and sacrifice. That's at odds with the message coming from the top of the party. I mean, is the Conservative Party aligned on this?
Well, look, I don't have to carry any party line. I can tell you what I think, and I think it is disrespectful. Yeah, it is disrespectful. We are a country who, outside of the United States of America, have the biggest NATO budget of anyone. Well, I was very aware of it when I sat in NATO meetings, and other than the US, we were by far and away the biggest spenders. And not only that, we have a military that is prepared to actually take action to defend our freedoms. So, at the time last year, April last year, I was asking our very brave servicemen and women, in this case from the RAF and from the Navy, to fire on the Houthis from the air and defend shipping from the sea. I didn't see other countries step up to do that. In fact, no other countries, with the exception of France, who have an interest in Jordan, were there when, for example, Israel was being attacked by Iran. Only the UK. And so I think to undermine, and I see that Vance has sort of walked from those comments, which I'm sure were made rather flippantly. But it is wrong to say that about our armed forces, who are always up for it, and the United Kingdom, who, although I believe we should be spending more, and in fact achieved the 2.5% of GDP on
You've got to ask the
defence.
question why you didn't spend more when you were Defence Secretary and the war in Ukraine was going on then.
Yeah, well, as I say, actually, we did. Whilst I was Defence Secretary, we upped the amount that we were spending on Ukraine to a record amount. So it was higher than even when Boris was in Downing Street, who was obviously hugely pro the Ukrainian side. And then also the 2.5%, which unfortunately Starmer then cancelled, but has come back to, which I very much welcome.
Thank you so much, Grant Shapps. Really appreciate your time. Sorry we had to leave it
You're
there.
welcome.
Well, the war in Ukraine is certain to feature, I'm sure, in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be PR consultant Alex Dean and journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? Chair of the Defence Committee, Labour MP Dhesi, and former Conservative Minister, now Reform UK member, Dame Andrea Jenkyns. Thank you both very much for joining us. Tan, let's start with you. I'm just interested to hear your take on Steve Bannon's interview, because I'll admit I do find him quite hard to interview because he wants to get his point across, doesn't he?
Look, there's much that I disagreed with. I think there was a lot of fake news encapsulated within some of his verbiage. Whether we look at the fact that President Zelensky's popularity, look, he's a war hero. There is not a case of some of the derogatory terms that he used towards President Zelenskyy. I think we need to recognise that he has stood up for his country at a time, by the way, that he was being offered a route out by the US at the beginning of the full-scale illegal invasion of Ukraine. And look, the one thing that I would say is that we need to up our game. That is something that I have been calling on since last year, that we need to increase our spending on defence, given the volatility that we are facing within our continent. We need to stand in solidarity with our Ukrainian friends, and we need to convince our other NATO allies to step up to the plate, to make sure that they're spending at least the 2% target that is there for NATO on defence.
Andrea, it feels like we've seen President Zelenskyy backing down a bit today. He's been talking about a ceasefire, he's been talking about Friday being regrettable. Do you think we're going to get a deal?
I feel it looks that way, and I think what Trump's been doing is just, look, he was in business for many years. I think he's playing hardball, and that's what he's doing there. But also, let's not forget that what the NATO budget, you'll know this, Tan, don't you? 68% is made up of by the US. So really, I didn't agree with Starmer actually discounting Trump in those negotiations, because let's face it, look, we need America, and it's better to all be around the table together. And so a key partner here, even actually for here in Britain, they're a key partner.
Do you think they're still a reliable partner, though?
Of course I do, absolutely. Look, this is a game of chess. This is them negotiating. And let's not forget as well, I mean, look, even on trade, they're an important partner. Look, 21% of our trade as a single trading partner is to the US, while Germany is something like 8%. We need the US, and we need to still have that strong relationship.
Agreed, but Andrea, I think we've got to be fair to the Prime Minister. I think he has played an absolute blinder. Starmer is the way that I would term it, is that he has gone to the US, his meeting with President Trump, which could have gone in any different direction, was actually a huge success. If we look at what he's trying to do, he's trying to pull together our NATO allies, those in the US, our closest and most trusted ally, as well as our European partners, because it's only by collective action that not only can we support Ukraine, but also ensure peace and security within our continent.
Look, we all want peace and security, and I do believe that's what Trump wants as well. But you do not, discount the most major player. And he shouldn't have done that. And I mean, I just think.
So you think Zelenskyy was wrong?
No, I think what I'm saying is that Starmer was wrong. He shouldn't have discounted Trump around the table and then going off doing their own thing. Because, the thing is, look at our economy. We cannot afford this. And the British public, we know what's happening with pensioners. People are still struggling to pay their bills, and they see this money. I'm not saying it's wrong to send to Ukraine, but people on the ground are struggling. And, the US is right. How are we going to pay for this? We're going to get into more debt. And when people are struggling already, and we cannot survive on our own, we need the US.
I think that's exactly what the Prime Minister's been saying, that I don't think it's a case of discounting the US, because while there have been some voices within the UK, including the Liberal Democrats, that have been very, very vocal on that particular aspect, that's what I heard from the Prime Minister ad nauseum at the dispatch box, where he was repeating that, look, we need to keep our US allies on board only through collective action, but we need to get some hard truths to our European allies as well. That, look, just as we have stepped up and have increased our defence spending from 2.31 to 2.5% by 2027, we need to ensure that those nations, especially those that are well below 2%, that they need to increase. And our Defence Committee was recently in Estonia, in Finland. And if we look at some of what the Baltic nations are doing, what Poland are doing, they're actually spending more than us proportionally on defence. So there are some within Europe that are doing.
And one thing that Bannon was right on, which I'm sure you agree, and Conservatives, we did let, and previous Labour governments, we have really let our defence go to the bare bones.
Okay, we're going to come back to you both. Thank you so much. There's lots to talk about tonight. Well, as we've been hearing in other news from the US, President Donald Trump has launched a trade war against the country's three biggest trading partners. Global stocks have plunged as America's goods tariffs came into effect today on products from Mexico, China and Canada. And the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has hit back with a warning to the US President.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal. But Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see.
Well, data and economics editor Ed Conway has this analysis.
Why are tariffs such a big deal? Let me give you a sense of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow a component as it's manufactured. Actually, it's a component that goes into a car, but it's a component of a component because it's a piston that goes inside an engine in a car that's made in North America. And right now, here's the journey it takes. It starts off here in Michigan. So in Michigan is where the raw aluminium that's going to become part of that piston is then shipped across the border, that's key here, across the border into Ontario. So in Ontario, it's cast into a piston and then it goes back to Michigan again, OK? And at that point, when it's in Michigan, it needs to go down to Mexico because it needs to be finished, and it's finished in a factory in Mexico. So it goes all the way down there, across the border, into Mexico. But the journey's not over yet because at that point, it needs to go back across into Wisconsin and then Michigan, where it's assembled. It's assembled into an engine. And at that point, from Michigan, it goes again across the border into Ontario, and that is where it basically becomes part of a car. So it's assembled into the car, and the car at that point is basically a finished product, and that's shipped over to the US. It's one example. Deep breath here. But if you've kind of totted this up, you might have come to the conclusion that, look, we're talking about 6 border crossings of that component, and right now, those border crossings in and out of the US are tariff-free, OK? And this is a free trade zone. If you're imposing tariffs on all of those border crossings, that will tot up. It will be a very big deal indeed because it raises the cost. And that is a really big deal when it comes in particular to automotives. These bars are basically just showing you how much of each different category of import into the US is coming from Mexico, from Canada, from China, of course, which are the affected countries here. And with automotives, you're talking about over 50%. Over 50% of all the vehicle imports, but also the components as well, come from these places. A lot of it from Mexico. You can see the green there. Look at energy. Over 60, well, it's actually around 60% is from these areas, imports, most of that from Canada. And overall, you're talking about 40% of all imports. So it's an enormous, enormous amount of imports. Imagine Brexit in the UK. So it's similar. You've got a free trade zone. We never actually impose tariffs. Tariffs here on any of these goods are going to push up prices. And of course, the extent to which they get pushed up depends on precisely how long these tariffs are in place for and how severe they are. This is showing you historically, so going back to the 1800s, just how high the average tariff rate was in the US. The famous example here, the 1930 Smoot-Hawley famous set of tariffs. Some say they contributed to the Great Depression. That was really high. What we're talking about here, it's not quite as high as that, but certainly the highest since the 1940s. So really historic levels. And the upshot of all of that is, as well as it meaning higher inflation, because the cost of goods potentially go up, it means less activity. And this is a kind of measure of just how much activity there is in the economy in recent years. And the higher this line is, the more activity there is. Look at this. Just recently, in the last few days, the expectation is that the US economy is shrinking by 2.8% in the first quarter. A lot of people will look at that and say, listen, this is part of the implication of tariffs, but also broader concern about US economic policy.
Ed Conway there. Now, on your screen, you can see a flurry of tweets from MPs earlier today who suddenly felt compelled, I should say, to post on one issue, planning. Why? Well, it's because of one man, our very own Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam is going to explain everything. What's going on, Sam?
Well, this morning, Ali, we launched the results of quite a lengthy investigation we'll be doing at Sky News. Now, all this year, I'm looking at the subject of growth. It's Keir Starmer's top priority, so he tells us. And I've been looking at why growth isn't as fast and as good as he wants it to be and the country needs it to be to fund our services. And I stumbled upon this particular thing that not many people know about, which is that quite a lot of the biggest projects in this country end up for months and months and months tied up in the courts because environmental activists can challenge them at no cost to themselves because of an international convention that nobody's heard of, based in Denmark, called the Aarhus Convention. Now, this is driving Downing Street mad. Is this the fault of the system, the activists, or ministers that won't keep their green promises? We've been looking in depth.
This is who the Prime Minister has made the poster boy for NIMBYs and blockers. Attacked personally by the PM in a national newspaper for, he says, squandering tens of millions of taxpayers' money. Now, Andrew Boswell has stalled the development of a huge new gas power station here in Teesside for months with legal challenges. Developers say the plant will be net zero, but he's certain his cause is a just one.
People will be very surprised to hear that they're going to build a gas-fired power station here. They are going to put carbon capture and storage on it, but our analysis is that that actually is not a good solution environmentally.
You have lost every case today. Can you understand why some people are frustrated at that?
The point is that we have laws in this country and we have a Climate Change Act, so we are holding the government to account.
This is just the latest case Mr. Boswell has brought, all made possible because of an international convention that means if he loses, it's the taxpayer who has to pick up almost all of the other side's legal costs, potentially millions of pounds.
What would happen if the costs that you had to pay weren't capped?
It would be very difficult for individual campaigners like myself and also the environmental groups and other groups who wish to go to court.
One area in this industrial zone is empty and quiet. This is where the new power station is meant to be. For now, a standstill.
This delay has already cost tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds. It could mean that the project doesn't go ahead at all.
This is the consequence of a system that caps the costs for people bringing challenges to projects like this. Can that continue?
It needs to be fundamental reform, and we need to stop these activists from being able to stop any sort of economic growth.
I understand the cost to developer of the delay amounts to £100 million every 3 months. Just one project of many being challenged around the country where the costs are capped and the taxpayer picks up the bill. Now, the government is promising change, but can it stomach the fight this would unleash?
The legal firm representing Andrew Boswell is clear that the International Convention is vital.
One of the laws they are going to be using a lot, pretty much universally, is something called the Artists' Convention, which is extremely important to every claimant who's bringing an environmental case in this country.
Can you just give me a sense of the scale of projects that are being challenged?
We're talking about 80 cases a year presently being brought on environmental issues in the High Court, and that doesn't sound like very many, but they are actually mostly very important projects of huge significance.
Inside Downing Street, they label the practice lawfare, a derogatory term meaning the strategic use of the legal system to damage an opponent. And I understand they want to stop taxpayers from subsidising it.
A very simple point is if those projects were made lawfully, if the decisions were lawful behind them, there would be no issue. There would be no challenge, the challenge would fail, and the money would not be paid.
It's empty sites like this where work is on hold for endless court cases that really gets the Prime Minister exercised, I'm told. But disarming the activists he calls blockers may mean breaking an international treaty. Is he really willing to have that fight? Sam Coates, Sky News, Teesside.
Let's bring Tan and Andrea back in, shall we? Andrea, I mean, this is just a reminder of how difficult it is to actually build homes, isn't it?
Yes, and, you know, I was Robert Jenrick's PPS when he was housing minister, actually, when he was housing secretary. And one of the biggest NIMBYs was actually Claire Coutinho. She was complaining about having something like 90-odd% greenbelt. And I said, look, in my old seat, Molly and Atwood, I've got 1%. Count yourself lucky. But the true fact is, though, I can see both sides because, look, at the moment in Lincolnshire, Miliband is trying to push to have 37,000 acres of solar farms in Lincolnshire. We're seeing is anti the gas find and the fracking. So, you know, there's got to be a checks and balance. If governments are riding roughshod, etc., there's got to be checks and balance. So, I mean, I've got a rally on the 15th where the no to solar farms, and you have got that democratic right to challenge. So, but like she just said, that if they haven't followed things to a T with planning, then, you know, they'll get into trouble for that and things get overturned. But if they have, then they won't be paying out. So there seems to be a checks and balance.
It's really interesting what Sam's talking about. You know, this is an international convention that means that basically taxpayers are footing the bill for challenges for growth projects. What do you think about
definitely,
that?
Ali, I think there's a fine balance, but I think this is once again where the Prime Minister will have to use all of his charm to get this international treaty amended. The Aarhus Convention, by the way, many within the environmental movement feel that it is being abused. So that's why that work needs to happen. But ultimately, look, we need to push towards growth, economic growth. That's the government's number one avowed mission. In addition to that, we need to push towards more renewables because we want to be energy dependent. We want to have cheaper bills
for
all the viewers. For all of your Sky News viewers, you want cheaper bills, but we also don't want to be dependent on dictators like Putin. We want to make sure that we transition our economy, that we're at the cutting edge of that new renewable energy sector. So I think in terms of development, that's one where the government has said that they're on the side of builders rather than the blockers.
I'm just really concerned, though, that, you know, is this a thing because they just want to push this whole green agenda with all the solar farms, like it's trying to plan and ride roughshod. I'm really concerned about that. And Dan, I like you, and we know we've got a good working relationship in Parliament all these years, but the fact is, the best and cheapest way to get the cost down and be energy independent is to frack. And Miliband has said it'll ban it.
But Andrew, what I would say is that the environmental consequences or certain damages that would be inflicted, I think that's why that particular issue is parked to one side. I think the key for us is if we want to bring down bills, if we want to make sure that we are transitioning to a greener economy, if we are to tackle the climate crisis as well as the cost of living crisis, then that's what we need to do. We need to push further with onshore wind, offshore wind, with solar farms. And obviously, as Andrea said, where I do agree with her, is that we don't live in an autocracy. People need to be listened. Their voices need to be heard. But ultimately, we as a nation need to move forward.
OK, a little bit of agreement there. Not that much. Right, still to come on the Politics Hub. Well, eyes were also turned stateside on this day 16 years ago, as then Prime Minister Gordon Brown took a trip to Dhesi to address Congress. We've dug through the archives to ask how much has the special relationship changed since then.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, we'll have the latest for you on the war in Ukraine as Sir Keir Starmer hails Volodymyr Zelensky's peace offering to Donald Trump. Plus, we'll be talking about the shocking report that predicts 3 out of 4 people in the UK will be obese by 2050. Plus, we'll be getting the critics' view of Meghan Markle's new lifestyle series on Netflix. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, lots and lots of talk this evening about the US, although it seems that's been the case every evening for the last few years. And on this day, 16 years ago as well, all eyes were turned stateside as the then Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, made a speech to Congress. Let's have a little listen.
Gordon Brown has told America to have faith in the future, that the economic hurricane that has ravaged the world's financial system can be overcome. The Prime Minister was addressing both houses of Congress on the final day of his visit to Washington, only the 5th UK Prime Minister to do so.
I come in friendship to renew for new times our special relationship that is founded on our shared history, our shared values and I believe our shared futures. But should we succumb to a race to the bottom and to a protectionism that history tells us that in the end protects no one? No, we should have the confidence, America and Britain most of all, that we can seize the global opportunities ahead and make the future work for us.
Let's bring Tan and Andrea back in. I guess, this was just a bit of an excuse, really, to watch that nice archive. And I think, it is a reminder, isn't it, of just how much has changed, Tan. Very different characters in Obama and Gordon Brown to what we have now. Yeah,
yes, incredible footage. And I think it was a huge honour for Prime Minister Brown, as it was then with President Obama, and for him to be able to address Congress. And he alluded to the special relationship. And
he alluded to trade as well.
And in terms of trade, that why we needed to not get involved in protectionism and not get involved in tariffs, but we also need to be very, very cognizant of our shared values as to how we can build a better future, but how that special relationship needs to be nurtured because that's the best way for both of us as nations to succeed.
And I guess, it's interesting because we've seen a bit of a global bounce for Keir Starmer, haven't we, over the last few weeks. It's sort of been in his element unexpectedly. And we saw that for Gordon Brown as well. I mean, do you think that's going to last, Andrea?
Look, he's always been a globalist, Starmer. He's always been more pro-EU than he has the nation state. But I think things are changing. Definitely compared to, as it was then. We've now got one of the great leaders in the West, one of the, in the US, where Trump is actually focusing on the nation state. So I think we're moving away from this globalist agenda. I mean, look, what we're seeing with the tariffs, it shouldn't come as a surprise because he said he's putting the American people first. So this is what he's doing. And I do think that when you see people in your own country struggling, I think it's going to have a knock-on effect in the West, and we'll start seeing as elections over the coming years, and people will be calling out for that more.
Very quickly from you, Tan. I mean, do you think this is going to last, this bounce we've seen for Keir Starmer?
Well, look, I think that he has been performing admirably. If you look at what the response was in the chamber, within the House, virtually cross-party support and cross-party recognition of what the Prime Minister had managed to achieve on the global stage, and he is now seen as a leader. And that's why I asked him that he should be the person that should be showing leadership. This is our moment as a nation, and for him personally to show that leadership on defence and security matters within our country.
OK, thank you so much, Tan and Andrea. Lovely to speak to you. We, of course, will be back tomorrow, and Sarah Jane Lee is up next with the UK Tonight. Thank you very much for watching.